reference. I mean, I was like, everyone will get this, right? No? I don't know. You're like, do people still say this? Well, it's 12:10, and I want to be mindful of your time, so we will go ahead and get started without our other 20-something people. I don't know. That's not right. Sorry, 2 seconds. I swear I'm better this time than I was last time. For those of you, there we go. Okay. So, thank you for understanding the salt and pepper reference. For those of you who didn't, that's why it says pitch it real good. I'm actually good at English, but that is the theme. I have to tickle myself when I make presentations. In fact, I went back and looked at a presentation on this exact presentation that I had given when I was at Indy Star. And I was like, how did anyone take me serious? I was so snarky and but the whole time thought I was so funny. And later it was like, maybe wasn't as charming as I thought I was 10, 15 years ago. But so for those of you, Lily, we didn't get our Maven Minute thing. I'll have her bring that. You know what? Yeah, it's not them, or it's not me. It's like, you bring them, yeah, the Maven Minute thing. So for those of you who we have not met before, I'm Leslie. I'm the founder and CEO here at Maven Space and Indy Maven. And if you put your name in the little vessel, I didn't see it, bowl, I don't know. We do this at all of our meetups, but we've incorporated it into our lunch and learns as well, where we call it the Maven Minute, and one of our members thought of it. And so we will basically draw 3 names, and you have 60 seconds if your name gets drawn to talk about yourself. If you want to just say pass, that's fine. I understand being shy. I won't make you talk. But it's just a way for us to get to know each other better, and you can talk about personal, professional. If you have an event coming up or a new launch you're doing or anything, this is your time to share that with the group. So thanks, Lily. So our first of 3 names is Mahani. Am I saying that right? Uh-huh. Is that you?
Yeah, my name's Mahogany.
Mahogany. Oh, that actually makes a lot more sense. I swear I can read. Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. You're great. Okay. Do you want to go? You seem thrilled.
I am an entrepreneur. I own 2 businesses. I have a marketing business and a journal business where I make guided journals by hand. I and I recently signed a contract to be fashion director because in my past time I've held 5 fashion titles in a while. So I recently signed a contract to be a fashion director. If you are between the ages of 12 and 26, we'll be holding a Miss Essence pageant in November. We're always looking for young, vibrant entrepreneurs, moms, and women looking to phase through philanthropy. That's it.
Welcome. Nice job. This is like the thing I love about our community so much. It's like you never know what somebody's gonna say out of their mouth. Like, I do pageants. I'm like, that's awesome. That's so cool. I would have never guessed that. And marketing. The next up is Jen.
Hi, my name is Jen Circleman. My attire, if you will. I own Sapphire Strategy. We're a marketing agency. Mostly work with service-based businesses or nonprofits. I'm also a certified Enneagram coach. Very passionate about and then I'm currently working on a passion project. I'm very excited about that.
Thanks, Jen. And that's Christina Mori.
Hi.
Hi.
I am years now. So I know things always change.
Thank you. Welcome. I have a 4 and just turned 7-year-old, so we are frequent flyers to the St. Vincent Ascension. Yeah, we were there last week for an ear infection and the week before for stitches. It's so much fun having boys. Well, welcome. Okay, so last month, if you were here, we talked about the media must-haves. So if you want to, I thought about doing this one first, but then I realized there's like the components that you want to have ready when you're ready to pitch. So that's why we did this in the order that we did. But we talked about the must-haves that you need to sort of have in your toolkit so that when the time comes and you're ready to start having conversations with the media, you're locked in and you're ready to go. So if you missed that or weren't here in person, we do have a recording of it that's in our members platform circle. If you reach out, we can probably get you there's like a private YouTube link as well that I can even just put in the follow-up of this. But so now we're going to actually talk about how to get that attention and what you're going to do. You'll already be ready once you watch that video. If you haven't seen it already, you've got your stuff in your toolkit, and this will be to start to secure media, whether you're looking to do TV, podcasts, print. It was really funny. The last time like I was saying, I was looking at my old presentation and it was all about the newspaper. How many people are excited to be in the newspaper now? So we're going to talk about the media landscape as it has obviously changed in the last 15 years. Talk about the key elements of a successful pitch. Talk about how those differ based on the media outlet if you are targeting one in specific. And then best practices for follow-up and relationship building. I also want to make the disclaimer that this is just the knowledge that I have gathered in my 15 plus years doing this, but it doesn't apply necessarily to all media. Not every outlet operates the same. Not every TV station to TV station, it's not all apples to apples. We'll go over the basics, and a lot of those are the same, but different platforms obviously are going to have different requirements. And the pitch itself, while there are certainly basics, you don't want it to be a one size fits all, because you want to make sure that what you're putting out into the world is already tailored to whoever it is, the attention that you're trying to get. My clicker doesn't work with a Mac, so I'm just going to have to keep coming over here. Understanding the media landscape. So this is going to be basic. I swear it's not all going to be so basic. But when it comes to thinking about the type of media outlets, obviously my background, newspapers and magazines, also have done a lot of TV and radio, but obviously now we're in the age of digital media, which is probably where you're thinking the most and where people are thinking the most. I wouldn't say necessarily to still discredit. Like, I think that the newspaper and TV are still great places. I did a weekly or monthly, I don't remember. I did a regular segment on Fox 59 the last couple of years. I chose to stop, not so much because it wasn't a good experience. It was just a lot of work on my part. The thing about that is, with something regular, it's really hard to track, right? Like, how are those translating in the same way that you can with digital media? If you have a story that gets out there, we can see exactly how many clicks. When it comes to TV, you're obviously just relying on the reporting of the station saying this is how many viewers we have. You can get that anecdotal feedback by doing surveys following your event, if that's something that you're pitching. How did you find out about us? So a lot of that is going to come from communicating with your audience. It's just that something to think about as you're doing pushes with your media. What do you want that outcome to be? If you want it to be really tangible and say, this many people clicked, you want a link, right? Or this many downloads of a podcast. It is harder to get that. The newspaper's never going to tell you. IndyStar is never going to say, oh yeah, your story got 3,700 links. They're never going to take the time to tell you that. They can't even tell you that if they wanted to. So if that is important to you, think about that as whether you're doing PR for a brand or just your personal outreach. Is that outcome something that is going to be important to you or not? And that will also matter where you spend your time. Why do you keep dying? Hello? Then I also just don't want to discount. People don't talk a lot about trade publications anymore, but I met a guy actually on Fox 59 that runs like Toy Industry Magazine. They have a huge readership, and I went to their website because they came to mind recently, and they're huge. Like, if you were in the toy industry, I don't know that anyone here necessarily is, but not to discount if you are a florist, if you are in healthcare, if you are in pageants, to not discount these trade publications, because those are the people that you really want to be talking to, of course. So, the role of journalists, right? A lot of people, and this is really interesting if you do still follow newspapers, especially, that people think that having a newspaper in their community is just like a right, and that it should be free because we have a right to information. But that is, if we're going to use our local newspaper, on record, Indy Star, it is a for-profit business, and that is why we now have to pay for content. That is not necessarily the platform and the approach and the model that every outlet takes, but I learned from my years in more of the hard news that there's a lot of like entitlement from the community to say like, well, it's your job to tell my story, and it really isn't, right? So just getting really clear on what is the role of media as a whole, whether we're talking bloggers, content creators, like what are the roles or responsibilities. And when it comes to an actual journalist, I don't even want to say it to someone who went to journalism school. I did not go to journalism school, so I had to learn all this backwards. But it's not something we're entitled to necessarily. It is their job to just basically report factual and accurate information that is newsworthy and going to be engaging to an audience. So that's something I think when we're talking about more traditional media, to remember that, it's, again, not something that they're obligated to do, but also that there's a lot of gray area now, because the world of content creation has changed so much that anyone can have a website. And we all know that with like fake news and all of this, right? So it's like anyone can have a website, anyone can say anything. So also making sure that you're aligning your brand, if you're going to take the time to pitch, and I don't know how to fix this to make it stop doing this, that you are doing it with outlets that you think are trustworthy and that are going to do a good job telling your story. Because the number of times I've heard people say, I did this media interview and then it was totally taken out of context. That's not what I said. There are some things that you can do to also help circumvent that if that's a fear, or you're talking about a subject that it's really important to make sure that the news is not misconstrued. But that's the main job of a journalist. And when I say journalist, we're going to use content creators or anyone that takes information and that helps amplify your message out in the world. So that could look like an online magazine, that could look like a blogger, that could look a lot of different things. So I kind of use journalists/content creators interchangeably. But your role as the person is to, number one, do your research. I think a lot of times, and I'm not saying this room, but a lot of times when we have that mindset of like, well, it's their job to tell my story, and I'm just going to tell them what I have. It's like the build it and they will come. I'm going to go tell everybody that I have this really great thing and expect that the phone calls and the emails are just going to start coming in. But if you haven't pitched maybe the right person or the right outlet, you're not going to see that. So it is the responsibility on the person pitching to also do your research. Is this the right platform? Is this even the topic that they cover? Do you have the right reporter? If we're talking specifically about traditional news, reporters do often change their beat. So maybe they were the food writer and now they're writing about arts and culture. So making sure that you're following along, and is this even the right person to be talking to? Understanding just their needs and deadlines. So that goes back to the last lunch and learn of what are the requirements that if your story is getting media attention, it's going to look maybe a little bit different if you're getting on a podcast versus a newspaper article. And when we go back and reference that, you'll see we talk a lot about like having good quality photos that you own, that somebody else doesn't own, that don't have a watermark, that are of the right size. So that's where having that toolkit is going to come in real handy, because when the reporter says, yes, we would love to do this story on you, we think that is the coolest thing ever, they're probably not going to send a photographer out. They're probably going to ask you to provide photos a lot of the times now. Sometimes they will. It's not to say there are never photographers that go out, but a lot of times now in the world, it is up to the subject to be providing the B-roll of video or the photography, and just having those things prepared. You're going to make sure that you don't lose your opportunity, because they say, I've definitely been like, nope, the deadline's tomorrow. So if you don't have a photo of the inside of your bowling alley, I cannot include you in this article. Now, a little bit better with content creators like Indie Maven, we can use Unsplash. We can use a lot of stock photography sometimes, but at the end of the day, the more the person is prepared, the better and the easier it's going to be. And then it's just to reach out. I think it's also been really interesting in my career when I hear that people are discouraged that the opening of their boutique wasn't covered, or they didn't make it onto some list. And then you start to kind of dig in and ask these questions of like, oh, I'm so sorry. Who did you reach out to? Like, didn't. Oh, so, okay, how it's not, content creators and reporters are just like everybody else, trying to learn as much as we can, as fast as we can. But especially if I don't live in that side of town, I don't know the same people obviously are doing their best, but no one person can have all of the knowledge. And so there is also this element of checking ourselves. And I have to even do it with our own marketing sometimes, right? Like, well, that didn't get a lot of signups. And then I look, did I post it on my even personal social media? No, I did not, And so making sure that you have that list of places when you are launching something or you do have news to share, making sure you're checking yourself and like, did I talk about it enough? Yes. And please do ask questions. I want this to be super interactive. So, sure. Mm-hmm.
Is there
Okay, so as far as where to reach out, I would definitely say that falls under the doing your research. Um, this is going to be a very obvious, stupid answer, but if you go to their Twitter and they haven't tweeted in 2 years, don't send them a Twitter message. It's shocking how often things like that happen. Using that as an example, I really think a lot of that comes down to personal preference, and that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. I never check Facebook messages, my personal Facebook messages. It's just kind of, I don't know, I have a resistance to it. I don't spend a lot of time there. For me, it's email. I will absolutely typically see a DM on Instagram, but I tend to forget about it. Like, for me, my email inbox is my hub of where I keep everything. And that could be different. I know a lot of people who much prefer to hang out in Instagram and have their methods of keeping that organized. But for me, all signs tend to point back to my inbox. I have a VA, a virtual assistant. So that means there's another set of eyeballs to make sure that if I don't respond, there's somebody else who later is going to go, oh, don't forget that email somebody sent. So a lot of it comes down to personal preference. I certainly would never be offended. This happens often where I'll get a message on LinkedIn that says, hey, by the way, I wanted to flag, I sent you an email a week or so ago, or even a couple days ago, just wanted to make sure you saw it. There have been so many times where I'm like, oh, thank you. That went to some random, it went to spam, or it went to some random inbox I didn't even know I had. So I appreciate that for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with a couple different touch points. I think where it becomes, I think everyone in this room pretty much would know, like, you can tell when someone's like, no, I'm good, or hey, I saw this. I think if you're not getting a response at all, then there's absolutely no reason to not try another avenue. But if the person's like, thank you so much for sending this, it's something I will absolutely review and follow up if I need more information, I would say 1, 2 max more outreaches is fine. Beyond reaching out twice after they said they've seen it, they're probably just not interested. But I would say absolutely do at least 1 more, because a lot of times it's just got lost in someone's world. Answer questions? Okay. Okay. So when we talk about the elements of a successful pitch, if we're going off of email, which I think safe to say is the main form of communication these days, is that's where your subject line is going to come in and be really important, and you'll want that to be extra compelling. There are so many fun tools, which when I do this again or later, I can make sure to add in. There are so many subject line analyzer tools now too that you can plug in, and it will give you feedback. If you typically, for something like this, you're probably not using a MailChimp, but most email service providers do have an AI tool now that will give you recommendations on what your subject line should be. Now, a lot of those they're looking at for mass emails, marketing emails, and newsletters, but the same kind of rules apply, right? It can't be super long. You want to get straight and concise to the point. I would use that same methodology in your first line of your LinkedIn message, or even if it is a DM. It's that, what is that very first line, and making sure that you're capturing attention. And also hopefully telling somebody a little bit about what that story is. And there's an art to this. Like, I think I could probably do a whole workshop for an hour just on writing email subjects, which maybe we'll do someday. I would say definitely the personalization. If you are going to number one, it helps if you do personalize, but it only helps if you got the name right, if you spelled it correctly. And those are pretty much the 2 main things. So the number of times I get emails that are for a pitch, and you can tell they just forgot to change the person's name, or they spell my name incorrectly. It's like, no one wants to, like, it happens, right? Of course it happens, but especially with that first impression, it's nice to do that research. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because it's number one saying, okay, you've actually read my work, which honestly just feels good as a person, right? You're like, oh, good, they've read something I did. But it also shows that you are invested and took the time to research. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free. Anyone can take a photo at any time. But it also shows, it gives me an idea, the story you're telling. Oh, like, okay, it falls into that bucket. It's that topic. I told that story that way. This is new information that could complement it. And, especially now, that's an article I can refer back to, or I can say, as a result of this story being told, we learned about this. So there's a place now you've given the reporter context. You've shown them that you have done their research, and then you've also sort of given them some framework, or maybe something else that they can play off of. Maybe they start to see a theme and say, oh, there's a series here, and you've inspired that. So yeah, definitely include other links. I have got to get glasses. Oh my gosh. Articulate why this is faded out. Why your story is relevant. So we talked about this in the last Lunch and Learn, but the 5 W's, going back to just the basic things we learned in school. Oh my God, I can see it here. of who, what, when, where, and why. Like those are, it's such an easy checklist. I talk about this all the time, but it's just such an easy checklist to go through before you hit send on whatever communication. Did I tell them who was involved in this, what I'm talking about, when this is happening, if there's a time frame, where it's happening, and why it's happening? It sounds so simple, but the amount of times we have to go back and be like, cool, this event sounds awesome. When is it? Like that's a whole extra step, right? And that's an oversight. Again, we make mistakes, but it's a nice gut check. Like I even do that. We do that in the Indie Maven newsletter. The one that's going out tomorrow, I saw that we were talking about this super fun event. It's like a sweat and sip dance party that we're doing here at Maven Space. Like a workout dance party, as well as Mixo Indie is going to do cocktails and mocktails. Did you say that's you? What?
No, I said that's fun.
Oh, it is fun. Yeah, but it didn't say the date in the main thing. Like you had to click through. I was like, oh, yeah. So I went through and asked myself the 5 W's, and that's how I caught it. So just keeping that in mind. Clear and concise messaging. I'm the most guilty of this. I'm a wordy person. I want to tell you everything, and I want to tell you the reasons I'm telling you and the other things that might be associated with it, and all the word vomit. I always hesitate now talking about ChatGPT and AI because I don't want our oceans to disappear, but also very handy tools to take your very wordy pitch and get it down to a couple of sentences. So I want to be mindful that we don't abuse that, but also I'm a big fan of making life easier, and it certainly does that. Clarity and avoid jargon, especially if it's an industry. If you are an industry person and you're talking about the industry stuff, it's one thing if you're talking to a trade and they're going to know it, but typically, especially for like a general content creator or audience, they may not necessarily know your industry jargon. And then finally, I would go easy on the supporting materials. Number one, you don't want to take a lot of your time to put these together if they're not going to use them. Part of it is just having your toolkit, right? Having those images, having the data, and all of that ready. But I would say these are the things that are available upon request. If you think it's going to make a difference in the pitch, then absolutely that's great. A lot of times I'm on so many national PR lists. If they're, especially if they're selling a product, like there's a new lip gloss and it has this really cool packaging. Well, obviously you want to have a picture that draws you in, but you also don't want to have a picture that's so big or 12 pictures or something that's going to get caught in inbox and spam. So just being mindful that you're giving enough to tell the story without overdoing it. Yes.
I'm curious, there are multiple photos in an email. Does that automatically at times register spam? Is there a trigger?
Can you just say, well, what I can tell you is more it'll get for me is when people are sending them that are too big and then they're just not getting delivered. It's more about the deliverability. I don't know, Jen, can you speak to that?
So it depends. It depends if you're sending it email address versus more advanced actually press. It could, because there's an attachment, flag something. So a way to get, but on the flip side, like let's say you have to drive or drop off or something, flag it too. Ultimately comes down to how advanced the skin are, because for people pretty much anything that is kind of put in. So it does depend, but what she said, compressing is really important. I would almost, I don't know, and I'm curious about your thoughts
Yeah.
here. I would almost send the initial pitch, say I have
Available.
photos that I'm
Yeah.
or something.
That's probably the best method. Again, if
Like for us, nothing. I have some sort of filter I can approve.
yeah. Did you have something?
So, like the Gmail or the Outlooks that are flagged as also their branded email. Branded emails say one list has authority, bought a domain to attach to email, so there's automatically links built in. Mail, all
Mhm.
this end. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I would say for we recently switched over to Google Workspace because our Outlook added this quarantine feature, and I couldn't get like the amount of emails too that I get. It was constantly. It was so much time for me to go through and have to release them from the quarantine. It was this extra step Jen's talking about, and that has improved a lot for us. But also just considering it really is on whatever the organization has set up. I know for Fox 59, the producer I worked with, who has since left, but she does not get press releases in her inbox. Her inbox is set up to make sure that nothing that says press release gets to her, because otherwise she would never be able to do email. So like that's set up where you can find people's email addresses, but just because I wouldn't assume that because you found the email address and you sent it and it didn't get a bounce back, that it necessarily got through to the person. And I think that's where it's really fair to look for that other opportunity to send a LinkedIn message or message somebody else in the organization and say, hey, I sent this over to them, but it seems like it could apply to you as well. Um, there's some workarounds, but I sort of hate press releases. I I say that with the caveat of like we're going to do one soon. It's a thing people still do. If it is a direct email, I personally wouldn't probably do it as a press release. I would do it more as a casual pitch and not use press release, because a lot of like I actually also have a filter where press releases go to a specific folder. So that can be a flag. Yeah. We're really, yeah. 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 And once the attachment, it's not like, oh my God, they used press release. Gross. That's fine. It's more just, is it going to get flagged? And I personally feel like my brain shuts down a little bit when I see press release now. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, so some like TV stations in particular, it's getting really hard to find those email addresses. And a lot of them will have this online submission form.
That no one will ever respond to?
That's my question. Is it even worth the time that something
Well, again, can't speak for every organization. Our general comment form does go to an email, and someone does read that, Brittany Maven. I think a lot of times those inboxes are staffed by interns or admin people where that can turn over. I certainly wouldn't rely on it as my only form of communication. It's not going to hurt, and someone would. And again, it depends on the organization, and it also depends on like the month at that organization. Um, and that's why I think, and like you can tell the reporters, like Angela Ganote is really good at getting stories from Twitter and from social media, even on Facebook. She will be on it. If you send her something and it is a hot tip, she reads it and she's on it. And again, I just use Fox 59 as an example because it's where I've spent the most amount of time in the newsroom specifically, as far as TV goes. So that's where coming in on social media. But that said, she's looking at more hard news. But like Sherman, another example of Fox 59, like if you've got a little new restaurant opening and you want Sherman to come do his little thing that he does, he's really good and responsive on social too. So depends on the outlet. Yes, that's a great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Typically, people are checking those more than, and also like forms just break sometimes. So I would say email over form whenever possible. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that totally just depends on the outlet and if you're talking local versus national. So I would say yes. Um, but when it comes to those that you maybe have to pay for, then it just comes down to the the I would say for like the average small entrepreneur, probably not. Like you're probably better off spending that money with a PR person or an agency or starting to work with someone in that sense versus them trying to go get on Muckrack. So obviously we kind of went over this, but um, print traditionally, right, can do longer. Obviously, it's the internet, right? So you can write articles as long as you want, but the attention span of somebody reading a print newspaper article versus Instagram carousel to get their news are two very different experiences. And so a lot of that is just coming down to how the reporter or the content creator would decide to tell it if you're not the one creating this. If we're specifically talking about pitching and I have this thing and I want you to talk about it, where are you expecting to talk about it? If it's like Mike, the indie food guy who just goes to restaurants and create reel, he doesn't need to know much other than this restaurant's opening. We want you to come try our food. That's kind of the end of it. That's not going to ever be a long form journalism piece. If we're talking about the USA Gymnastics sex abuse scandal, that is a very different read, right? So just thinking about where do you think that your story, your content, or your pitch fits in, and then that's how much information you need to give them. So then, of course, we have local versus national. Um, in order for example, for Indie Maven, we just focus on local. It might be, there typically has to be some local tie. Um, I have written for national publications. I have been featured in national publications. Anytime I've ever been featured, it's more because I was creating content that then a reporter picked up because they found it through just like honestly a Google search, right? Like I was quoted once about starting my Christmas shopping early that year. I don't, because I had done a blog post about it. I was quoted in like Penthouse, I think, when the Super Bowl came to Indy because of something I put out about potholes. I can't even remember, but a lot of it has come out because I was just a person on the internet saying things without even a huge following. But whenever that reporter was like, I don't know what's going on with potholes in the Super Bowl, I guess they found me and then I got quoted. So sometimes I think we also overthink it. It's just like talking about your thing over and over and over again. And the internet's a big place, and eventually someone might stumble across it. And now I think seeing how to more, um, this isn't in here because this is not so much about pitching an outlet, but there is something to be said for getting picked up by creating your own content and also opportunities for, say, guest posts. That is, again, a whole different lunch and learn, but I think now more than ever, it is easier for you as a business owner or PR person or whatever your role may be to pitch yourself as the thought leader and the content creator now. So that's like seeing an op-ed in a newspaper or IBJ, and I'm an entrepreneur, and here's my experience as a woman entrepreneur, and I want to take a stance about how during Women's History Month we get all this attention, and then we don't hear from anybody the whole rest of the year. Or Black History Month, we get all this attention, and then we don't hear anybody else for the whole rest of the year. And you know, there might not be anybody on IBJ's team that's gonna necessarily do that, but there's a good chance they might run your rant about it as well. And now with digital media, especially and on the national level, when you look at like Greatest as a media outlet, also now syndicates to Refinery 29 and HuffPost. And so like a lot of these places, if you can just get picked up on one, they will syndicate and then they will do that work for you. And now all of a sudden you can get featured in 6 different places. So if you are going national, I would say that's even more cause to do research and see if you're pitching a national publication, where are their syndicates and where is that content run? Because that could do a lot more of the work for you. But I am not an expert in national. I can speak mostly to local. So we talked about Toy World, but trade publication, niche blogs, something like an edible indie. You'll also see now something like Using Edible Indie. They've really expanded beyond food. They are moving towards lifestyle, but obviously if you have a food story, that's going to be a pretty obvious one. But also just thinking about what publications are maybe even adjacent. So I think the most obvious thing is like, okay, well, I'm a florist, a wedding publication, right? Maybe you don't even necessarily aren't huge into weddings yet. Photography, like what are all these adjacent places? A photography blog might still do a post about photographing wedding florals or something like that, right? So like what are those industry adjacent things that you can say, well, I'm not a photographer, I'm a florist, but flowers are really pretty, and we could do the angle could be like how to photograph your ring with the bouquet and all the different things that a photographer does, or a checklist. So kind of thinking beyond also just a literal, if you're a florist, you don't just have to do the floral publications. What are could you talk to event planners? What are all of those industry adjacent outlets that you could pitch as well? Questions? Comments on that one? Follow up. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I would say a few days, at least. I wouldn't if you turn around and followed up the next day, that would be insane. Don't do that. I think a 3-day window is probably safe, depending on the person that you're pitching, the outlet you're pitching, whether or not you sent it to a general like news at whatever email address, or you did a DM, right? So just taking all those things into consideration, but understanding that you also have the responsibility to then turn around, and if that journalist does need something, they're probably going to need it pretty fast if it's a newsy thing. If it's an event that you have happening in 3 weeks and they respond to you, then you better have all your talking points from the last session already ready so you can just fire it off. Because you don't want to say, oh yeah, I'll get you that, and then 3 days later they maybe have already been like, yeah, I'm already over it. They'll forget. They've moved on to something else. So the key is also making sure in that follow-up you have the stuff that you need ready. Gentle reminder, we did also talk about this. I would say just avoiding being pushy, or again, thinking that this is somehow, yes, go ahead. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and weird hours. Everybody works, especially now, right? And people working remote. So um, I would just say no harm whatsoever in following up, but we're all busy, right? We all get a bit behind. So just keeping that follow-up brief, like 2 sentences type of thing, just pushing it top of your inbox. You don't need to reiterate the entire story or press release. But I also think, the building relationships part is super key, because now if that journalist, they've done a story with you, they're going to recognize your name in their inbox. They're going to be far more likely to open it and say, oh, wait, I know that name. That's familiar, when they're scanning it. But other ways to get their attention is also just sharing their work, even if it's not about you. So if there is a journalist and it's like, or a content creator or a blog, and it's your hope to be featured on that, that's so cool for the content creator or the blog person to go back and be like, oh, they've actually shared my content before. And oh, look, it got this engagement. So if I cover their story, I know that they're going to amplify the message. I know that they're going to share it with their audience, because ultimately that's their goal, to get in front of more eyeballs. And you've just proven to them, whether that's them or maybe they see that you did it with somebody else's story. It doesn't have to be theirs, but to be able to see, like, this is something that you're also going to take and amplify. Because it's really frustrating to have someone pitch you a story and then you cover it and then you see that they never share it. That doesn't feel good, right? You want to be like, oh, cool, then they shared it with their audience. Like, we're all in this together. So then to be able to have that long-term relationship. So I know now, like, okay, this reporter at Wish TV, she is always up for covering women's issues. So if there's an event or something I have, I know she's going to be my go-to person first to share it with. And then also you can later hold some power in leveraging those relationships. I have, we just announced this to our members. This will go out publicly next week, but when we move out of Maven Space at the end of March, we're actually going to pop up at the Propoleum, and we're going to operate Maven Space out of this beautiful historic mansion down the street for the next couple of months with free parking until our new space is ready. And we'll be doing a press release about that. We're tearing it out. Our members are going to get that information first, then our entire audience, then the press release. But before that press release is going out, I'm going to send it to like my 3 favorite reporters that I know are going to be interested in covering it, and kind of give them the scoop and the heads up, so they kind of have a first right to get on the story before anybody else. So it's like also what can you do for them? Not just what they can do for you, but what can you do for them? Social media manners. It's people like to know that you are already engaging with them, that you are following their work and what they do. Engaging, they're not going to notice that you've just followed them, likely. But if they start to see you popping up in their comments, again, that familiarity with your brand or your name is going to just start to be repetitive, and something that their brain flags and says, oh, yes, I know that person. They comment on things all the time. Like, that has told their brain that this is a safe, friendly person or product or brand that they want to be associated with. Obviously, nothing spammy or really impersonal. So that's where we just get into the like, no, hey, reporter, right? Like, hey, Leslie, spelled correctly. I loved that story last week in the Indie Maven newsletter about this. I have something that is really similar, but has a whole different spin on it. I think you might be interested. Let me know if you want more information. We talked about, I don't personally like Facebook messages, but somebody else might love them, and you will get responses all day long. And then just having those links ready in your social media as well. So when we talk about like, well, what am I, if there's no website, like, are you linking to a website? Are you linking to just a drive with the press release in it? Thinking about what can you share to them also in those social media encounters that are going to be that quick hit, where you don't really necessarily want a whole long message, but maybe you can say, well, here's the link, or I'd be happy to email it to you. Questions outside of what we've already talked about? Yes. Hmm.
Like when I get in front of a
I definitely know of a couple local. Don't haven't you worked with? Have you worked with a media trainer? No, she's a speech. A couple. Okay, exactly. There are a couple age. I know. Oh, one line one. I think is her name, and I will put this in the follow up or find it. I want to say it's like she has a new agency, but I know she does media training. And I have worked with her over the years. So I know she does. I know Casey Cawthon, who does PR, or Harrison now, Casey Harrison. I think she's done some media training. So I would look to a lot of like the local agencies or PR professionals also tend to offer media training. A while back, there was like a husband and wife, both former anchors, that do it as well. So I would say look to the local people too, because then you can get that in person time and feedback. I'm sure there are online as well. What Susie Moore is someone like where I was referencing the pitching and that the reach from doing the content creation. She's someone who has a lot of free resources. Um, Not so much on like the media training side of things, but more about creating content to get picked up and be your own PR person. She's a really good resource too. Yeah. Other questions? Does anyone have anything that they're like thinking about pitching or would like to get featured somewhere? Yeah.
so I am the
Great.
this is
Yeah. Yeah. As much as I think so many months, like the national days can be, it's a bit much sometimes. That is a really good hook. And it's also helpful just for SEO purposes um, to identify like that is a hook saying March is national. Is it? So is that March? National? Oh, okay. So those types of hooks are fine. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. I think just doing a general, we have events coming up. Here's the list. Maybe not so much that, but if you can, I would say there's nothing wrong. Pick one maybe as your main focus and say, in addition, because I've definitely had that happen where somebody pitches something and then mentioned a few other things that are happening. I'm like, the main thing's actually not very exciting to me, but that's really interesting. So if you can work it in where it doesn't feel like overload and distracting from the main thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Mm-hmm.
like I had one story that was really close to the
Mm-hmm.
but I have another one pitching her now.
Oh wow.
So really great, so good,
Yeah.
that could have some great larger.
As far as getting someone to respond or
Yeah, one making the right, like these are trying to think like
uh,
at the end of like I think I have the opportunity. I'm encouraged to try to break. I know. I mean, I was the
yeah. But you also know then having that experience that they're always going to be looking for more stories. So I suppose in that element, it's kind of a good thing. There's not necessarily a timely hook. Like that's always going to be, as long as she's a nurse, that's always going to have been her experience. Um, I do wonder for something like that, like has there been local coverage?
This particular,
Yeah.
no, not for this one. I mean, we're still
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, same thing, affiliates, like affiliates pick stuff up. So maybe the approach to national is actually just going local first and then seeing if it gets picked up that way. Going back to like, well, who did the People magazine stories and pitching those same reporters? And that gets a little hard, especially now with freelancers tracking those people down. You know, that's a bit hard. But I mean, outside of, I would say if the issue is just getting into the inbox and getting that seen or getting that attention, I mean, that's kind of just like repetitive, like sticking to it, coming at it from different angles. I wonder if it is someone who is really, maybe if she's like great on camera, like, is that a good opportunity to already have some B-roll type stuff done where they can see if it's really emotional as she's telling the story, maybe just having that B-roll or those visuals already as a link.
I mean, that's how I got attention.
Or do you also do their social?
So we all work together.
But if you could maybe work with them too and getting some of those clips on social and getting that engagement and then linking back to that as well, or sending it directly on social or tagging, like I would think social might be a good opportunity to get attention for something like that as well. Maybe I'll keep thinking. Well, that part is tricky, but there's lots of, yeah, I mean, the nice thing is if you can get that right, like soundbite or something where that starts to get, I hate to say it, but there's also the whole approach of just going viral and trying to get social attention that way. It's like you can go on any news station now and see that they're picking stuff up from social. So that could be an approach. Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead.
So I'm Susanna Rodriguez Griffin, and I own La Jefa Promotions, which is the first female-owned professional boxing promotion company. Yeah, and so I do a lot of footwork, right? That for me has seemed to be the best avenue. I met with you, Leslie,
At
at another
Indie Rainbow Chamber. Yeah,
Yes.
I remember.
And Kylie, I believe that's her name, wrote a paper,
Oh,
an
yeah.
article. And I did a lot of the Instagram stuff. But now I'm in a level of this particular focus that you have today to go on that and soliciting myself via email. Writing the right way, but concise. Get the attention, catch the hook, pull them in with more detail. Learning that process. Um, so to get back to my focus here, I appreciate your rhythm that you provided to me. That's going to help me a lot in our round three. We've had two professional shows here in Indianapolis. Being the first female has been a good focus. That's what got us in the door with Fox 59 was connections. A lot of my clients know those anchors or hang out with those anchors pretty well. And the hook, who are you and how are you different? How or why do my eyes need to go to you? And then you pitch it, right? And catch them. This, thank you again, will help me out in round three.
When is that?
May 17th. Yeah, it's in Armory, so it's like a couple of blocks away.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, we'll
give
make
everybody a card.
Yeah.
In case that's something that you're interested in, either coming to support or everybody has a phone. Instagram, Facebook, social media does tremendous.
Yeah, we'll make sure we put that in the newsletter too, because yeah, you have it a little bit easy in that way of like, there's nobody else doing this, so you kind of have the angle already. It's bye, thanks for coming. So yeah, that is a huge element of this is just how do you get that to stand out? Yeah.
Maybe just being a mom who multitasks puts you up to the next level where Joe doesn't have that.
Yeah. Did you have one more thing? Yeah. No. Yeah. If you want to just ask that, we'll wrap up.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
so the thing that I'm running into
Oh wow.
And so there's a little bit of a but they think they're limited to seven.
Uh-huh.
And so people like hear that kind of stuff, like, like either think I'm full of shit, you know, and just be like, no, you're not. But they don't, you know, they're not centered around. And I think it's also that we're not like it's
Yeah.
kind of a bit of an obvious concept,
Yeah.
you know, but we are the first one. And so we have a lot of momentum right now. Like we've had our clients.
Awesome.
So when I'm reaching out to pitch, I feel like it might fall a little flat, like I'm sounding alcoholic or, you know, I just.
I not knowing a ton about this, but like first reaction is like I would be doubling down and like no, I am the first. Like if you know that for a fact, then lean into that hard, really hard, and say, and that is just becomes your talking point. Yeah, here we are the first, and here's why. There are other organizations, and they tend to focus on veteran support. We focus on this is how we are different, right? We are abuse survivors, and this is something that for sure has not been seen here before. And I would just say it's like a confidence thing and being more, taking up more space with it. Are you an Indie Maven member? Okay. So as I say, like I would, if you ever want to sign up and do a power hour, I feel I have a million ideas off the top of my head. Oh, perfect. Okay. What's your organization? Oh, okay. Yes. I feel like there's a lot you can do with that. And that's great that other people are telling those stories. But yeah, I think just shouting it louder and be bigger with it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We'll wrap up. I don't know what next month is, but you know, we'll follow up and let you know. And I hope you come. Thank you. Ooh. So handy to have you in your brain here. Thank you. You too.
Or the kiddos.
Thank you for coming. Finally healthy. I think. I know Ethan got kicked out of school Monday and spent the entire Friday in the principal's office, so he's got some shit going on. But you know, other than that, they're healthy.
Yes,
Thank you. Yes,
I
please give me
definitely
that
will.
same reminder. Yeah, I'm so excited for you.
Can I interrupt your conversation?
Absolutely, go
real quick?
ahead.
I'm
Mhm.
curious. You're leaving here in March, and then you're going close to Broad Ripple, right?
So when we move to our new location, it'll be in Nora, which is 86th Street. Yeah, right. And then, but the temporary location is like 14th and Delaware, by the it's like a mile from
Okay.
here, basically. So still
Okay.
downtown.
We're
Yeah.
in Nora.
86 in Guilford, right across the street from the library. So like if you turn off College, you're going north on
Did you buy the
College.
building?
The one that's
Yeah,
yeah, it's out the Bronx.
Alright,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, I didn't buy it. I'm leasing it. But yeah,
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
I saw the signs.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why.
yeah.
That's my area.
yeah. Is it?
It's my neighborhood. So
But that's okay.
I was going
Celebrate
to
earlier.
pitch to you.
Yeah.
You need a little bit of
while
luck,
back,
right?
and then this came
Yeah.
through. What I would like to eventually discuss is the women empowerment, but
Yeah.
learning how to use your hands in case, I don't know if you noticed this or if you heard this. Over the weekend in Purdue, a girl got assaulted. I mean, she got punched in the face and then sexually assaulted. Yeah, research it out. But clearly, these are
Yeah.
things that maybe coming to a gym, it's harder for people to feel
Yeah.
the need to do that,
Yeah.
right? Let
Yeah.
alone the confidence. But creating an energy, like your energy here,
Yeah.
I'd never been here before,
Yeah.
is very chill, laid back.
Yeah.
We can all
Like more
vibe.
approachable,
Yes.
like to the
So
less
maybe creating
intimidating.
something like that.
Yeah, that's a
I thought
really
you were
good
gonna have a
idea.
location in the Broad Ripple zone. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, we're still
Yeah,
Broad
we're
Ripple
close.
zone.
Yeah.
whether it's done here, I don't know your schedule. I
Yeah.
looked on your website.
Yeah.
And I saw the different areas.
Yeah.
But that's
Oh, I
something
would
that
totally
I
do
think would definitely,
Yeah.
like tomorrow you have some kind of event.
Uh-huh.
And I only noticed that because you told me that
Yeah.
while we were sitting
Yeah.
here. I'll look that up. But marinate on that a bit.
Yeah. So would it be as like a self-defense class or
You-
more just like here's how to
I think if you
do we
pitch
call
it
it
as like
that,
a
or is it
boxing
more just a
fitness,
box- yeah.
you could even put your spin. I don't know how we could kick that off. We could do kickboxing in there too, but I wouldn't really tag it as a self defense necessarily because I think, like for me,
Yeah.
I know how to box, so I don't need to go there.
Right.
Or I'm never gonna need that. Why?
Right. Right.
Unless you put a disclaimer on exactly why.
I mean, honestly, who doesn't want to know how to throw a punch?
Yeah.
or maybe that.
Yeah.
I just honestly like
Yeah.
Maybe it's girl, knock it out, or
Yeah.
something similar,
Yeah.
right?
like like honestly boxing basics kind of like
Yeah.
girl knock it out.
Yeah.
And
I would
and you
totally
can say
wanna know that.
whether you want to know that for your fitness, you want to know that for your
Put it in
bodily
your pocket when you
autonomy,
need it.
have it in your pocket. I
Yeah.
love that. I would totally do that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
Okay.
that. And we were just talking this morning, our programming, people were really into, we did pickleball, people were really into that. Like when we work in, people, our surveys have basically said every kind of like third one, they want some physical fitness worked in there. And I
Yeah.
think if you have the added